In 1970, Elliott Carter wrote an essay in which he attempted to shed light on the rhythmic intricacies of his string quartet No. 1, and to do so, he quoted Thomas Mann from The Magic Mountain.
It would not be hard to imagine the existence of creatures, perhaps upon smaller planets than ours, practicing a miniature time economy. And contrariwise, one can conceive of a world so spacious that its time system too has a majestic stride.
You see, throughout Carter's long and industrious life, rhythm was at the forefront of his imagination. He was interested in utilizing rhythm as a structural tool in a variety of interesting ways. My friend Marc Hannaford, an incredible pianist and composer and assistant professor of music theory at the University of Michigan, devoted his entire master's thesis to this very topic. In that thesis, Hannaford points towards Carter's desire to express both rhythmic freedom and control, somewhat akin to the elasticity of jazz musicians' time. In our modern world, I believe that it's more important than ever to fight hard against the quantization of every parameter in music in favor of a more human form of expression. So when Francis IV asked me to explain how to write complex metric modulations in Sibelius, I realized that this topic would benefit from some demystification. I mean, the whole goal of my Hey Man, How Do You Do That series is to enable you, the viewer, to incorporate new tools into your compositions. So if you're looking to add some elasticity to your beats, to abstract the pulse of your music, to inject some life into stale grooves, look no further. You might already know from my previous video about polytempo that the term metric modulation refers to an immediate change in tempo in which the following music is directly related to a note value from the preceding music. We're going to be talking about Elliott Carter again because he coined the term metric modulation and used them as a fundamental building block of his music. However, in her book Behind Bars, Elaine Gould refers to these musical phenomenons as tempo equations, a term which I think actually makes a lot more sense. Metric modulations often don't involve a change in meter at all, and at the same time, I think the term can easily confuse people to conflate changes in tempo with modulations in harmony. So maybe let's all adopt tempo equations as the universal term from now on? I don't know. Maybe? Huh?
Brass Tacks.
Okay, some brass tacks will help us avoid confusion later on. So, composers prior to Elliott Carter wrote tempo equations in reverse to the way we do today. The convention was to write, for example, quarter note equals half note precedente, meaning that the preceding half note becomes equal to the following quarter note. It makes sense.
But don't you do it.
Today, we should write tempo equations like this. First, you want to put an equal sign above the bar line. So Option Command T will allow you to create system text rather than staff text, and you write an equal sign. By the way, more often than not, this bar line is going to be a double bar line. I did that by pressing Control Option D. And the reason for that is that metric modulations often usher in a new section of music. They're a pretty dramatic change in tempo. Now you place Q-sized notes on either side of this equation. The note value on the right hand of the equal sign inherits the value of the note on the left of the equal sign. An easy example is this: the length of the preceding quarter note. So I press Control and then click the cursor to write a quarter note is equal to the length of the new half note. This, in other words, is double time. So if you're in 4/4, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Finally, I recommend adding arrows before and after these equations like this, and then you center the equal sign over the double bar line. And the way to do that is to click, then hold Option, and that little arrowhead will stay exactly where it is, you see? It's not going to move. So again, click, hold Option, and put that equal sign right over that double bar line. And this is the way to write a metric modulation, or as Elaine Gould would call it, a tempo equation. Now, Francis 4 was asking about an exceedingly complex tempo equation. The preceding quarter note is equal to a half note plus an eighth note. So here it is already. I'm going to redo all this work so you can see exactly how it's done. So first of all, we're going to start with a time signature of 4/4, and I'm going to write just 4 quarter notes on the note G so that you can hear exactly what's happening. Now, what Francis asked for was a quarter note equals a half note plus an eighth note, and what we do in this situation is just tie the half note to an eighth note. What this is telling us is that this quarter note at this tempo, and I'm arbitrarily going to call the tempo quarter note equals 60 just to make it easy. These quarter notes at quarter note equals 60 are going to share the same duration as a half note tied to an eighth note in this new tempo, which we have not figured out what that new tempo should be yet. For a tempo equation of this complexity, you need to clarify by writing the new tempo in parentheses. We need to have our arrows, and then in parentheses next to it, you put quarter note equals, I'm going to leave it blank because we don't yet know what the new tempo should be. This also helps Sibelius to play it back accurately, and especially it helps the musicians reading your music to quickly make sense of what is, frankly, a pretty crazy metric modulation that's going to be hard for them to wrap their brains around. We know that a half note tied to an eighth note is equivalent to 5 eighth notes. So if a quarter note equals 5 eighth notes, that means each eighth note in our new tempo is going to be 5 times faster than the quarter note at 60 beats per minute. So it's a pretty easy equation in this case. 60 times 5 is going to give us the value of our new eighth note. 60 times 5 is 300. So now, if I put a half note tied to an eighth note, 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 each of these tied groups of 5 eighth notes is going to sound the same length as these quarter notes. And remember, we have to keep the equal sign over the double bar line to make this as clear as possible. So this is what this should look like. I'd also highly recommend clarifying this complex of a tempo equation even further with the music itself. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, it would be extremely helpful to the performers if one of the instruments playing would lead into the new tempo with a common subdivision. You could lead in to these eighth notes, these Cs, with 16th note quintuplets. So at this tempo, quarter note equals 60, each 16th note quintuplet will have the same duration as eighth notes in our new tempo, because 5 eighth notes equals a quarter note. And so if we divide this quarter note into 5, it's 16th note quintuplets. I hope that's making sense. If I sing it, it would sound like 1, 2, 3, Deca, 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 deca. I know that a lot of you viewers of Hey Man, How Do You Do That are already asking yourselves, okay, but what's an even crazier tempo equation? Well, I would say if you want to see tempo equations pushed to an extreme, you need look no further than Elliott Carter's First String Quartet. So I would highly recommend you just Google this and follow along to this entire score if you want to learn about the depths of metric modulation. I hope this clarified things for you all. If you want to see some other interesting metric modulations, you could look at the score that I uploaded for the saxophone solely from my tune, Steep Ravine. That sort of borrows from Carter in that the metric modulations allow for the whole band to gradually slow down simultaneously without using rubato. And it is just a very exciting and interesting structural technique. So I would highly recommend that you all incorporate it into your own work. Please comment below and let me know your favorite examples of metric modulations. Click like, click subscribe, click the little bell which notifies you when I release a new video, and consider checking out my Patreon. I want to say thank you, as always, to my Patreon patrons who make it possible for me to produce these very time-consuming videos. Please consider supporting the channel in whatever way you can. Thank you all very much, and see you next time on Hey Man, How Do You Do That?